Mr. Roseman here. I'm going to give an introduction to early modern Russia, which is going to build a massive empire within this early modern era, just like we see happening for Western European countries. The same thing will be happening for this major Eastern European nation. So we're going to cover today about 1450 to 1650. Next time I see you, hopefully we will be covering Peter the Great through Catherine the Great. That will be from the late 1600s through the mid 1700s, late 1700s. So right now, just a short introduction into the Russian Empire and its start for the early modern era. However, first, we always start with contextualization. So to know where we're headed, we need to know where we came from. So let's look back to post-classical Russia from around 600 to 1450. Recall that Russia began not as Russia itself, but as the land of the Rus, or the Kievan Rus, which was established by a mixing of the Vikings from Scandinavia and Western Europe, mixing with the Slavic people of Russia. Kiev was the major trading city established on the Dnieper River, and rather quickly, a clear social structure had formed where you had the princes, who ruled over individual independent city-states like Kiev and Novgorod. Below them were boyars being the Russian nobles who controlled lands in the countryside, and then you had a very large class of free peasants. Recall also that Kievan Rus had a strong trade relationship and cultural relationship with the Byzantine Empire, and as a result, Byzantine influence rubbed off on Kievan Rus. For example, we see that in the spreading of Orthodox Christianity, the use of icons in the Orthodox Church, the adoption of the Cyrillic alphabet based on the Byzantines' Greek alphabet, having gained that through missionary activity by evangelizing Orthodox priests and monks. And we also saw how perhaps Byzantine ideas about government, the idea that an emperor, being these all-powerful rulers or autocrats, how that could maybe make some princes more powerful if they adopted those similar Byzantine strategies. That doesn't happen in the post-classical era, but consider that for the early modern era, where we're heading in this period for. We also saw that by the early 1200s, the Kievan Rus came under direct contact by the Mongols, specifically the Golden Horde or the Tatars. Kiev, we know, was absolutely destroyed. And besides that, there were other major impacts from Mongol rule over Russia from the early 1200s to around 1400 or so, including not only the collection of tribute, but the preservation of the Orthodox Church because of the Mongols' religious tolerance policy throughout their empire. We also saw the development of serfdom as a key social economic system in Russia, which is a system that lasts until 1861. And finally, in place of Kiev, we have a brand new city rising, Moscow, due to its princes collecting tribute on behalf of the Mongols. So Moscow is going to come out of the Mongol Empire, Mongol control over Russia, in a major way, leading Russia. So once we get here to the early modern era, around 1450 or so, we've got Moscow as that new political focus of Russia. There are princes there, and over time, by the late 1300s, early 1400s, we have some of these princes starting to challenge the Mongols, recognizing that they have overexpanded their power. They had loose control over Russia. So princes like Prince Ivan III, nicknamed the Great, Ivan the Great, makes major attempts at militarily pushing back the Mongols. And this is a constant work in progress through the 1400s. But because of their newfound sense of power, these princes of Moscow started to refer to themselves as Tsar, which implies a sense of being a Caesar or emperor. Ivan III, he kind of called himself the Tsar, but he really didn't have unlimited, absolute, or autocratic power. That's really going to be seen primarily for the first time by Ivan IV, or Ivan the Terrible. But keep in mind that these princes of Moscow rise in power over time. So through the 1400s and up through the 1700s, we see some major trends for this growing Russian Empire, with Moscow as the center. For one, these czars increase their power over time, becoming true absolute monarchs, very much like their Western European counterparts. First seen, as I said before, by Ivan the Fourth or Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible is a good person to point to as being the first true czar absolutist ruler over Russia from Moscow because of the severe steps he took to maintain control over the population. So, knowing that an absolute monarch has unlimited political power, um, boyars attempted to sometimes rise up against the princes of Moscow trying to claim power, and Ivan the Fourth was really paranoid about this. So, as a result, rulers like Tsar Ivan the Fourth, or the Terrible, and actually all future czars made use of secret police. So remember that Ivan the Fourth, you may recall, used something called the Oprichniki to murder and basically terrorize boyars in order to keep them in their place. So though they were nobles, the czars are expecting that the boyars are going to follow the orders of this increasing centralized power claimed by the czars themselves. We will also see that the czars in the future will use serfs and ownership of estates, rural estates, so large farming estates. Think of like manors from Western Europe in the post-classical era as rewards for their loyal service to the czar, remaining loyal, not rising up and challenging the czar's power. So from that, the use of secret police and these rewards of coerced labors, these serfs, and the rewards of estates, farming estates, these were all tools used by czars through this early modern era as an attempt to maintain control of the boyar population and therefore the general population too. So throughout this era, we see an increase in serfdom, whereas over in Western Europe, serfdom is weakening severely, but it's intensifying in Russia. So Eastern Europe and Western Europe are going in opposite directions by the time we get to the early modern era. But something that's true for both Western Europe and Eastern Europe in the form of Russia here in Eastern Europe, both are establishing major empires. But in the case of Russia, it's a bit different from these Western European states like Portugal and Spain, France, Netherlands, and England, who are creating maritime empires. For Russia, they're creating basically a land-based empire throughout Eastern Europe and increasingly into Asia. For the College Board, Russia is considered an Eastern European state, or Eastern European nation. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Russia equates to Eastern Europe, at least the biggest chunk of Eastern Europe for our early modern era focus. All right, so throughout this era of the early modern era, we see almost constant Russian expansion over land. So they're not necessarily using navies to expand, but more so their overland armies and settlers to do that. So what originally motivated this early Russian expansion? Primarily, it was to push the Mongols back out of Moscow. So as the czars like Ivan III and Ivan the Terrible push the Tatars, the Golden Horde, the Mongols back, Russia naturally starts to expand. Also, knowing how these czars are treating their people just so brutally with things like the secret police, a lot of peasants serfs tried to flee the central control of the government from Moscow. So the further away they got from the center of politics, the freer they felt. So that will be a motivation for their expansion too. But always nipping on their heels is the expansion of the centralized government of Russia. And eventually it's going to catch up with them. All right. So keep that in mind. And you can kind of see this here with the Cossacks. These were men and women recruited by Ivan III and Ivan IV to migrate to newly seized lands in the south and the east of Russia as they're moving out into the open steppe. So these are going to be sparsely populated areas, but these are rugged settlers. So They're also multicultural, not just Orthodox, but they will come in their interaction with Muslims and other groups as they move, especially southward across the steppe, closer to the Middle East. But this will be the makings of what's known as a multicultural empire. And we've seen those before in places like the Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire. But Russia will be certainly an example of this multicultural empire as it constantly expands eastward, southward, and eventually also westward in every direction. So if we take a look at this map of Russia here, you can see Moscow right in that red area. And as the Mongols are pushed back, Russia expands. So it starts off as a small empire, but gradually expands outward. So Cossacks would move southward, all right, towards the Caspian Sea, towards the Black Sea. You can see where it says Cossacks here, all right, but also eastwards, eventually towards areas like Siberia, in far eastern Russia, basically what's Asia, but considered again for College Board purposes to be part of Eastern Europe because it comes under the control of this Eastern European Russian state. All right. So there's a strong push to create this land-based empire, and by the time we get to 1750, this is the world's largest land-based empire for the early modern era, having seen the collapse of the Mongols. And that helps explain why Russia is currently still the world's largest nation, at least in terms of land territory, land empire. All right, so as we move forward, eventually, Ivan the Fourth, we know he had severe bouts of paranoia, and maybe this led to him killing his only son and potential heir. So as a result of that, when Ivan the Fourth killed his son, left Russia without an heir, it opened up major conflict between boyars, what became known as the time of troubles. And this is a severe understatement, I think, because it led to civil war between boyars, claims on the throne, and because they fought to a standstill, eventually, in the early 1600s, the boyars decided to get together and elect a new czar from a completely new family, one of these boyar families. And who they selected was a member of the Romanov family. Keep that name in mind because we are not going to be able to escape the Romanovs from here on into the 1900s whenever they are finally overthrown, eventually by and murdered by communists, but that will be in the early 1900s. So the very first Romanov to rule as Tsar is Mikhail Romanov, and he rules there from 1613 to 1645. Some major impacts of the establishment of Mikhail Romanov as the new Tsar following this time of troubles, this conflict between boyars, was that the Romanovs as czars are going to continue to increase their power over boyars and serfs, even to the point that not long after Mikhail Romanov died, under Alexis Romanov, serfdom became hereditary by 1649. So this meant that if you were born to serfs, your father and mother were serfs, you were a serf yourself, and you would be until the day you died. And any children that you produced, they would be serfs as well. So this becomes ingrained and legalized in Russia. So we essentially see no social mobility for serfs, no chance of escape from these boyars and those estates that they're controlling and usually gained by being loyal to the czars. And again, these Romanovs are going to remain in control of Russia until 1917, whenever the very last czar, Nicholas II Romanov, abdicates or gives up his throne in the face of major revolution in that year. So with that, I've now set us up to be able to cover Peter the Great and Catherine the Great in the next days that I see you here, hopefully, both of which were Romanovs, but they recognized how far behind Russia was in relation to Western Europe. They had missed out on a lot of developments due to Mongol rule back in the post-classical era. So when we look at Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, a major emphasis we're going to put on is their westernization of Russia, or selective westernization of Russia, I should say, where they are picking and choosing aspects of Western European culture, technology, politics in order to reinforce their power and strengthen this growing Russian land based gunpowder empire. All right. So we will talk to you soon and have a great day.